Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Advice Series webinar, Catapult Your Career, Networking and Relationship Building Strategies for Junior Associates and Law Students. I am Emily Roshek, Director of ABA Legal Career Central, a career center that offers both career development resources and a job board for law students, lawyers, and other legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, Grover Cleveland and Betsy Manel. Grover Cleveland is a Seattle lawyer, speaker, and author of Swimming Lessons for Baby Sharks, The Essential Guide to Thriving as a New Lawyer. Grover specializes in programs to help new lawyers successfully transition from law school to practice, helping them provide more value and avoid common mistakes. Betsy Manel is a business development coach, career advisor, and social media trainer through her company E.H. Manel in Boston. She's had over 30 years of experience, 25 as a partner in a large law firm. She is a board member of ABA Legal Career Central. Thank you both so much for being here today. Grover and Betsy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Grover, for joining me today on, I think, what is your very first ABA LCC webinar, one of many to come. And everyone, welcome. Today, Grover and I are going to be talking to you about ways for lawyers to develop networking skills, to help them advance in their firms or other workplaces, and to inform their efforts to develop business and expand their practices. So let's first start with the word itself, because it is a misunderstood, sadly misunderstood word. Networking is not selling, not schmoozing, but it is the process by which we get out into the world and interact with others with an eye towards forming mutually beneficial social and professional relationships. When we think of networking, we think about making contacts, right? So getting to know the people who can help us get a foot in the door at a possible employer or a new client, getting to know the people who will enhance our visibility in the legal and business communities and generate positive word of mouth. We think about the senior associates and partners or other bosses who will give us the best work and help us advance at work. So seeding your network, these sorts of people, is an essential first step in building a rich and self-sustaining law practice. And frankly, it's the very first step in developing any career you ultimately choose and achieving your maximum potential. One thing we want to accomplish today is to dispel some of the myths about networking. And if we're lucky, we're going to address the bias that so many lawyers, including some of you, many lawyers, young and old, in fact, with an absolutely broad range of experience, have from before law school and on into their careers about this truly essential career activity. It is laden with bias and myth, and if we do our jobs, we're going to give you a clearer sense of it. So I want to turn to Grover, who has written the book on networking, in fact, particularly as focused on new lawyers and law students who are breaking into their careers and need some good advice. Grover, your book is focused on success as a new lawyer. How would you define networking for new associates? Let's start with that. What does that involve?
Yeah, thanks, Betsy. And I just want to welcome everybody and say Happy New Year. And your resolutions are off to a good start by just being on this webinar. So congratulate yourselves. With respect to networking for new lawyers, from my perspective, the general goal is to work on providing more value to more people as you advance in your career. And as you mentioned, Betsy, we're not talking about sales, but I do encourage people early in their careers and throughout their careers to focus on being entrepreneurial. And by that I mean, think of yourself essentially as being self-employed and take initiative to build relationships within your office and outside your office, enhance your substantive skills, and really be proactive about building your own practice. And one way to think about this that I like a lot is to think about the sources of power, how people gain power and advance at law firms. And this is a concept that Pat Gillette, a partner at Oric, helped crystallize for me. She gave a speech on this at a Miss JD conference a few years ago. And You want to think of, some of the sources of power. One, obviously, is the revenue that you generate from doing work. And then their internal relationships. You want someone who will advocate for you and show you the ropes. Then there are your substantive skills that make you valuable to internal and external connections, and obviously the external folks who can be potential clients. So the focus of those sources of power and activities will shift as you advance in your career. I do think it's very important to focus on building internal relationships first, and you want to make sure that you understand what your firm's perspective is on networking and business development for new lawyers. But with respect to building your external network, at the very least, you want to stay in touch with your classmates and do what you can to learn about clients. And you also want to remember that when you are developing your substantive legal knowledge, that's an important foundational step for you to be able to provide value to your professional contacts.
Okay, so you talk about classmates. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, because I know we have a lot of law students participating on this webinar. I want to ask you, Grover, because this is your constituency to a certain extent. What advice do you give them?
Well, we actually got a question right before the webinar from a law student, so I'll start with that, and I'll just read the questions. It's very eloquent. I've been told not to stress since I do not have a job a few months prior to graduation, but I can't help it. How can I network for job prospects at this stage in my law school career without sounding too forward about looking for a job? And the second question was, how do law students make connections in other cities where they don't currently have contacts, cities that are different from where they're going to law school? So first, I would just say that it's totally understandable that the process of networking and finding a job would be stressful. And it's far easier to say don't be stressed than to actually not be stressed. But you do need to remember that just by completing law school, you have made a huge accomplishment, one that most of the rest of the population hasn't been able to achieve. And you don't want to assume that things will turn out, that the uncertainty will turn out in a bad way. I have a couple stories that I love. One, Somber, Tennessee, at the University of Houston relayed to me, and she was talking about how a student was anxious about asking for informational interviews because that felt like imposing on people. And what turned out with this particular informational interview was the person who ended up giving the interview was able to get a contact, a useful contact from the student. So you don't know how these things are going to turn out, and you don't want to presuppose that. And the other story that I love is one that I call Toy Story. And a law student was babysitting for a judge as a way to make money during law school. And the law student showed up one evening as the judge and his wife were about to go out, and there was a toy, a very complex toy, spread out all over the living room. And it turned out that the judge and his wife had been trying to put it together for their child for quite some time without success. And the law student, after they left, just ended up working on it and putting it together. So when the judge came back, the toy was complete, and the judge was ecstatic and interpreted it as a sign that this law student was diligent and tenacious, and ended up helping the law student get a job. So you want to think about those qualities that you have that you can highlight that show the qualities that that lawyers will value. And and don't assume that things will go badly. I just try to keep plugging away, and remember to reward yourself. It's easy to beat yourself up for not having a job and such, but remember to, you know, give yourself a break when you need to and reward yourself. Quickly touching on the out of state question, I do have a handout on that topic, a column that I wrote for Above the Law. And so that's with the materials, but a couple things to note. One, I think you first have to nail your geographic reason. You've got to convince people that you have a definite reason and you are definitely going to move to this city. Without that, people are going to be skeptical about potentially hiring you because they may be concerned that you will change your mind. So that's the first step. And then I would focus on the low-hanging fruit. See what you know, you can find with respect to alumni in the new city. I would encourage you to visit if you can, because that will help you make in-person connections and show people that you're serious. And if you can identify groups or associations that, you know, join the local bar association. And, you know, there's a friend of mine wanted to do estates work in a different city. And so she joined the Rotary Club in that city and began to meet the people there because they were her potential client base. And that ended up working really well. And don't forget the internet. One person I know ended up getting a job by offering to do informational interviews with lawyers in a new city and about their practices. And she posted those on the Miss JD blog site. And the interviewees were happy to do that because they got publicity, and it was an entree for this student to figure out how to make connections in a new city. So try to be creative and try to be persistent, and just trust yourself that it will all work out. So
I like the suggestion about reaching out to people, learning about the organizations and so on. One of the things I always do with my clients and my friends and the children of friends when they're in a new city is tell them to find somebody they do know who can reach out to a lawyer in one of the firms perhaps they're considering trying to interview at, and ask them to talk to them, to the person I'm suggesting do this, about opportunities for volunteering in the city and which are the most attractive, which are the most contributive, because that is a way of getting in and talking to somebody about something that means a lot to them. It is perhaps not as profoundly authentic a way to march into somebody's office and ask for a job, but it is a good way to get started. So I'm sorry, Grover.
Yeah, I just had a couple more. I realized I didn't touch on the how to not sound too forward. And in my experience, I would just say, do err on the side of being assertive, and you can try to turn what made to you feel like desperation into what appears to be enthusiasm. And so if you're enthusiastic about working for somebody, that's a positive. And in my experience, you know, people are busy, they may not respond to you in the time that you think they should, but unless it feels to you like you're being a real pest, I would just encourage you to consistently follow up with people.
Okay, let me add one thing before we go to the next question, and that is that when you're in school, you need to be thinking, even in college, in law school, always that the network you build then among classmates, professors, is going to be important to you down the road. So if you are not looking for a job, you're still building the network on which your reputation will be based, through which you will find people of influence to help you get jobs, but also to develop business. So in law school, as Grover said, stay in touch with your classmates. Some of them are going to grow up to be treasured friends. Some of them are going to grow up to be both treasured friends and wonderful career contacts. I don't know that I did a very good job of this, frankly. It would be a great story if I could tell you that I had known, perhaps haughtily ignored, Chief Justice John Roberts when I was 25 and stupid. But actually, I didn't, because I had no idea who he was, nor did any of the rest of us, even though he was in our section and a roommate of our friends. He just really sat in a place in the ether, in another zone that none of us occupied. And we have no recollection of ever meeting him. So it's not a great story, but it's a good example of some of the people who can be lodged in that room with you. Keep an eye out. There are some smart, interesting people. Stay in touch with them. It's worth doing. And the second thing is that I do coach the students at my school. Every spring, I coach 5 people who are going into law firms. And I build with them a strategy for their summers. And it is not around the question of getting an offer. I'm not worried about them getting offers. I'm worried about them hitting the ground running after their 3rd year, when many of them go back to these firms and they know some people and they've made some strategic connections, and these people are going to give them a leg up. They're going to give them the best work and hopefully help turn their reputation into that of a superstar or something on the way to that. So focus on it in advance.
Yeah, well, that's great advice, Betsy. And I know you and I have talked about, when you get to a law firm, you need to do more than just keep your head down and work, which is good advice, but it's not the only thing that you should be doing. And I know you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, knowledge is everything, whether it be everything in terms of what you can base your networking on. You need to have knowledge of the law, but you won't have much when you graduate, as we all know, given the state of legal education. When you actually have to do practical practice, you're not going to be very well prepared. So how do you show your smarts? How do you show your insight? Well, you know other things. You understand the world. You're a grown up. You can read the paper. You can think about what's going on in the world of business, most importantly, and try to think about what is happening to the firm and its clients and their businesses, especially if if there's an industry or sector the firm focuses on. Then be the person who learns about that. You don't have to be young or old to be able to be a knowledgeable person about the world, and it's not rocket science. And you don't have to know a thing about the law to understand the business of the clients that a law firm serves. You are going out into the world, many of you, to practice law in the world of commerce, and you need to understand that world. So I would suggest that one of the things you do when you're a young lawyer and you're working with a team of other lawyers is become the person who has that residual knowledge. Learn, pass on the knowledge, even if it's only by asking questions of the people more senior to you. Those questions are going to be smart ones. And if you save enough time during the day to pay attention to the news, which is most easily done for this purpose through social media, because you have to get the news as it happens to be truly valuable. But if you're watching Twitter or carefully watching your LinkedIn feed or your newsletters, then you may be the one to march into the room where everybody's evaluating the interrogatories and say, whoa, look what just happened. Our client just sold a company in the southern part of its footprint. What do we think that's going to do to its prospects? How is this going to have an impact? And you can call someone up or walk into the partner's office that you work with or your colleague and say, I just saw this. Did you see this? I'm sure you did. And they didn't, because you saw it first. And that really makes a difference. It has nothing to do with the actual practice of the law. So that leaves me with a topic near and dear to me that I'm not going to get off on because I'll be doing it for an hour, which is that many millennials, many young lawyers who have been raised drenched in technology and who need to be using social media to research and be ahead of the game on this sort of knowledge really don't understand the value of anything that doesn't measure up to Snapchat. So it's important to learn how to do that and be the repository of very, very valuable information. That will give you the empowering confidence that knowledge always offers to the low man or woman on the totem pole.
Well, and Betsy, I would just add that, I like the approach of using either something like Google Alerts or, Westlaw and Lexis will also give you alerts about, client news and developments, and those can be very helpful.
Exactly. And look at your LinkedIn feed. If you use some of the more advanced features in LinkedIn, you can watch the industry that is of interest to you. So let me turn to Grover and ask him a question that is certainly related to this knowledge consideration. Grover, I'm sure most of the people on the call consider cocktail receptions abhorrent, like many of us do, certainly lawyers, and think of networking as something like that, as events. And so for some people, any kind of cold contact event, whether it's one-on-one or 1 on 1,000, is just nauseating. So how would you advise new lawyers on how to approach these sorts of things?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. You have to remember that they're difficult. They can be difficult for everybody. I mean, we imagine that it's something like this, very salesy and cheesy, and we wish it were more like this, very social and collaborative. And it can be particularly hard if you are going to some networking reception where you don't know anybody and most of the other people know someone. But do remember that it's not easy for anyone. I was talking to a CEO of a large company here the other day, and she was mentioning how much work it was to prepare for a networking event, to research the people that she wanted to meet and decide, what her goals were, and then to actually find them at the event and then to follow up afterwards. And she very much considered a networking event to be work. And I think that's a good approach, even though this slide doesn't make it look like work. A few of the things that you can do to make it less awkward, and we touched on this earlier, but you want to try to take the sales out of it. You want to try to focus on the other person and ask open-ended questions. Be curious. If you can take a friend with you, that helps as well. But people love to talk about themselves, and they will be open to sharing their stories. You can ask things like, "Tell me about," or what brings you to this event, and really listen. And Betsy and I are going to touch on this later, but you don't want to sort of look for the opportunity to interrupt, because if you are trying to figure out what you're going to say, you're not really listening. And there was a fascinating story a fascinating study that I read about that involved people introducing themselves who were standing in a circle. And people had a fairly easy time remembering the names of everyone in the circle except the person who did the introduction right before them. And the reason, of course, was when the person was introducing themselves right before they were going to introduce themselves, most of the people were thinking about what they would say, how they would introduce themselves, and they didn't catch the name of the other person. So try to stay focused in the conversation. If you're an introvert in particular, make some specific goals. Once you've achieved those goals, give yourself a break if you're exhausted, and don't try to be too hard on yourself. Betsy, any other thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I like the Grover and I have talked about this before, actually, the inattention problem. Everybody has this problem. It's rare that people are born listeners. And you have to learn to be that person. The best way to be that person is to tap into your natural curiosity. If you are not curious now, become curious. It is critical to your ability to learn and your ability to interact with people, not just to network, but to build relationships. And I will give you an example. Instead of standing next to somebody and listening to them tell a story, for example, if somebody talks to you about a problem that is occurring in their life, there is a tendency to go, oh, yes, that happened to my cousin, or oh, yes, I have a sister also. Registering your self-reference is not necessary. If you're going to do it, jump out of it right away and get back to them. But talking to somebody about someone in your world who also shared the disease that their father shared is not productive. I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I will give you an example of a good way to approach it. And this is my favorite story of my actual networking life. And that is that it didn't happen long ago, but it was near the end of the time that I was practicing law. I went to a Chamber of Commerce event because the topic was of particular concern to me. And I realized I didn't know a single person there, which was bizarre because I was old enough to know somebody and there was no one there. But I saw somebody who looked like they were having the same problem, standing alone. And I went over to him, feeling badly for him in general, and said, "Hi, my name's Betsy Monell. I'm a lawyer. You know, why are you here?" I made some sort of joke. And he gave me his name. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "I'm in supply chain management." Now, that is a job that I kind of know. I kind of understood what it was, but I really didn't grasp it. I just knew it was important. It's Amazon. It's something like that. But I thought, here's my chance to find out exactly what it is so I don't sound stupid the next time this comes up. And I said, "This is great. This is karma. You can tell me what supply chain management is." There's always room for humor in these sorts of situations. What is it? Tell me. He gave me, he's not used to people actually caring what he does. He gave me an elevator speech. He's expecting me to now say, "Oh, so where are you from?" But I didn't. I said, "Thank you. And I don't want to be dense, but I really am not following. Why don't you give me your average day, 9 to 5, 9 to 10, whatever it is. What do you do?" So he said, astonished, he started to talk and he started to tell me about his day. And I didn't stop there and just listen and look over his shoulder because I was actually interested, by the way. That's the trick, actually care. I said, "Wait, I didn't understand that. How could that happen?" Each time I didn't follow. So my questions were smart because I was listening. And this man will never forget me. I have forgotten what supply chain management is, and I've never seen him again. But that doesn't make the story less important. It is how I listen to people. It's how Grover listens to people. And it's really the way to proceed. It's a really critical part of everything we're talking to you about today. So that being said, I'm going to switch back to Grover again and ask him to get back onto the same topic, really, the difficulties lawyers have grappling with what they consider to be a kind of nightmarish task. So after you've made a connection with somebody, you've had lunch with them, you've run into them, it's to follow up, you can't really say, "Okay, let's have lunch again next Wednesday." You don't know them well enough to do that. So how, Grover, do you stay in touch with this person and begin to develop the relationship? I will say, by the way, that one of the problems with most of the people I coach is that they will look at me and they say, "Well, I took him out for drinks a couple months ago, and then I took him to a basketball game, and he has not sent me any business. What's with that?" And of course, that's not how it comes to you. So, Grover, what do you think?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And just one other thought on the prior question. I don't believe I mentioned this. One strategy that I use at networking events and cocktail parties where I don't know people is to find other people who are standing by themselves, and they will be so relieved that you came up to them and talked to them. So they are also not the quote unquote only person not talking to anybody. So that can be a great strategy. The other thing you can try is to find the hosts and thank them for the event, ask them about the event, and oftentimes there'll be other people around the sponsoring organization or the host, and the introductions can go from there. So just two other tips to make it a little more comfortable. On follow-up, fewer and fewer people carry business cards now, so I recommend that you try to connect on LinkedIn as soon as possible. You can do that right on your phone. Obviously, you don't want to be using your phone in front of them while you're talking to them. But as you go to get another drink or whatever, you can either jot down their name on in the notes section of your phone to follow up on LinkedIn later, or you can if you have time, you can connect right then. Obviously, if you can add a personal note, that's great. But I recommend that you connect with them in some way that allows you to follow up, so you don't lose the contacts. And as you've continued to maintain that relationship, it's great to follow up on birthdays, promotions. These are fairly obvious things, but there are ways to make it more automatic, which I like. You can, for example, schedule electronic birthday cards in a service such as Punchbowl, and there are also several services that will send out handwritten cards. They're not actually handwritten cards. They look handwritten, and you just type the message online, and the service takes care of everything else, and those can go out well in advance. And so those are a couple good ways to stay in touch, and obviously keep track of LinkedIn, and if there's some life event, comment on it, and do get in the habit of trying to be helpful with respect to your network. Betsy, do you have other thoughts?
Yes, we keep hitting on these all important things, and I keep saying, well, that's everything. Well, knowledge is everything, but being helpful is everything too. And that's where you can add value, even if you are not sophisticated enough yet in your practice to be the first chair on a piece of work. But let me give you some examples of how you add value, just from my own practice and that of my colleagues and my clients. You have a person that who you like very much and you consider to be a valuable member of your network, and she mentions that her daughter, they have finally found a hall for her daughter's bat mitzvah. Now these, as most of you probably know, these are planned sometimes a year or two in advance. So you write that date down, thank you. And you write a date down beforehand that is a reminder of it. And a year from now, if we can all think that far ahead, you see that date, you get a card, possibly a gift, but probably not, and you send a card to the mother or the father, possibly the daughter, but only if you know them. And then you call up after the bat mitzvah, which is a huge event, more important to some people than anything that has gone before. And you say, how'd it go? Was it great? And let them talk about it. If I say, helping people is everything, children are everything, people's children. If you can do something for a child. One of my colleagues had a child at a university of interest to one of his contacts. And when that contact toured that university with his kid, my friend arranged for the kid to get together with his son, and ultimately spent the night with him in his dorm. Again, hugely important, much more important than the non-disclosure agreement that you drafted last week for that person. Alert somebody to the fact that tickets to their favorite band are coming online, and if they don't get online at 10:01, they'll all be gone. That will make a difference to people. So I'm going to go back to that kind of value and remind you that if you can possibly follow the news aggressively with respect to the people you care about, you'll be able to help them that way as well. And we mentioned that also.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. And we've touched a little on in-person networking, because there are lots more avenues available now than there used to be. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of those ways for people who really, really can't stand the in-person networking. What are their options?
Right. Really, no matter what your personality or style is, networking is feasible in this era. It's better than ever. Introverts can shine in the era of the internet, because the internet gives them social media, and social media gives you a chance to stop and think. and write with care and rewrite and edit the notes you send to people on LinkedIn, the emails you send, the posts you make on LinkedIn or Twitter or elsewhere, the things you read and share, to demonstrate what you know or how you think. And that's a very, very useful thing. It also is possible in some cases for people who are real introverts or shy, which is not the same thing, obviously, to interact in a warm and collegial way earlier than they might be able to do in person. Because some people, it takes them a while to be able to do that, or they're uncomfortable in one-on-one or group settings. So keep that in mind. It is your friends. Social media and the internet are your friends because they give you a chance to calibrate your tone and take your time.
Yeah, and Betsy, I would just, advertise. I mean, I would just elaborate. You do want to find, what is most feasible, comfortable, feels best for you. But I would also encourage people who don't like networking events to try to get a little out of your comfort zone, because sometimes they're inevitable. Sometimes they're the only ways. For example, at conferences, they can be the primary way that people connect, and it's useful to figure out ways to be more comfortable with these events. And as you do it more and more, the awkwardness and the anxiety level will definitely go down. But regardless of what option you choose, you need to be consistent about it and keep in touch regularly. And I'm a big fan of habit trackers. Two of my favorite right now are apps called Coach Me and Habit Share. They both have a social feature where you can connect with friends, and they can nudge you if you're not checking off your habits. And one friend I know he claims he uses LinkedIn to procrastinate, and he has fantastic posts on LinkedIn all the time. And I told him, I thought that is one of the best ways to procrastinate ever.
This is so true. That is exactly what I do, Grover, as you may have noticed from my posts. But getting back to that idea of time and procrastinating, with everything that the people on this call have to do in their lives just to stay ahead, get their work done, how do you recommend that they manage their time to be sure they have enough time to spend on networking?
Well, that's important challenge for everyone, particularly lawyers. Time management is a huge issue. I do have a couple of checklists, one for law students and one for new lawyers. There is some overlap, about ways to identify your goals and prioritize your activities and decide how much time you need to spend on certain activities, as compared to others. With new lawyers in particular, you want to focus on enhancing your substantive skills and building internal relationships and finding people who will advocate for you, because they will help you advance in your career. And I really encourage new lawyers to think of every assignment that they get as a way to help cement internal relationships. One of the most strategic ways that I think you can build both internal and external relationships is to work on a seminar or CLE paper for another lawyer, a more senior lawyer, because in that way you gain substantive skills, you build your relationship with the senior lawyer, and most likely you raise your profile with both an internal and an external audience. I know a lawyer who used to work at Microsoft, and he would say that when he went to a CLE presentation, he would look at the materials and find the name of the very last person listed, and he would call that person to ask additional questions because he knew that was the person who actually did the work and put the materials together. So
for sure.
If you help, you should ask to have your name included.
One of the things I was just going to drop in about internal networking, you do need your name to develop as a known person. In your department or practice group, one thing you can do is offer to report at a departmental or practice group meeting on a large matter you're involved in, an important matter, doesn't have to be large, or a case you're working on, a decision that's been reached. If you say, would you like me to talk for 5 minutes at the practice group meeting, the director will probably be thrilled because they're often looking for content. And the other thing I recommend is if you are in a multi-office business or law firm, attend that meeting somewhere else if there are conference meetings so that you can meet people in another office. Even if you have to spend your own money to go visit another office, it can be very smart to do that, particularly if you are, as is often the case, the only person in your practice area in your office. So this would pertain to people in small offices or what are sometimes referred to as satellite offices. Let me ask you, Grover, again, another networking question. And this one is common to both of us and the people we work with. It can take many, many years, as you and I have experienced, to develop our clients and our relationships. What do you tell people who want to know when they're going to be done? You know, when will the networking start working for them and earn them money? And a separate question, but related, when do you actually ask for business from these people you've been working with and getting to know as friends?
Well, let me take the second one first. My approach to when do you ask for the business is to couch it in terms of, let me know if I can be helpful. I like that approach because it doesn't invite a potential no, so you can keep the conversation open. So you're talking about a challenge, then you explain how you have helped someone else with that challenge, and then you say, let me know how I can help. And that's going to be much better received than, oh, can you give me a new piece of work? So that's my approach to that particular question. And I don't think you're ever done. You don't know necessarily exactly where the business will come from, when it will come. You do need to regularly, take stock of your activities and identify, where you are with your goals and, what may be working and what's not. And if you think you're stuck in some way, certainly ask, people in your network for help. But it does take a long time, and a lot of people analogize networking to dating and getting married, and it's a long process of first building trust and letting people understand that you have this expertise and that you're willing and able to help them. So those three things all need to happen, and they don't happen instantaneously, obviously.
One of the things about asking for business, and it really is difficult. Some people are better at it than others. Some people are less afraid of it. And the question can go over quite well with those people. There's something about their delivery, like, God, it'd be so much fun to work together. When are you going to call us for some business, Grover? Might not be a bad thing to say. It just depends on your personal style. I was never able to do that. But one thing you can do as you're getting closer to the ability to work for somebody is to offer to do some things for free. We used to always say, I did finance work and deal work. We used to always say, listen, if you get a deal you're bidding on, just send us the term sheet. We're happy to review it and comment. We're happy to draft a proposed term sheet for you. That's the problem. If you bring the deal to us, if and when you get it, that's fine. We'll do whatever you want to help you. And we did. Or we offered to clients to train their young people. Would you like us to come in and train your people in finance issues and how they work in legal documents? So that's one way of stepping into the person's workplace, getting to know people, letting them see your actual work. And I really recommend that kind of loss leader. Now,
yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Grover. We're heading towards networking success stories.
Great idea. Yes, I would love to hear your networking success stories because that's a perfect segue to what we've just been talking about.
Well, I have one that I like to tell about when I was a very young lawyer, and we were specializing, my colleague and I, on working with people in the media and communications area, so that industry. And so we were spending a lot of time learning about the industry. That's something I recommended to you earlier in this call. We read up on it. We went to conferences, trade conferences. We learned the jargon, but we were sometimes just flying by the seat of our pants, but we knew the buzzwords. And networking for us meant meeting as many people in that neighborhood of people who were doing deals in that industry as we could. And that was everyone from the actual operators of cable and radio and TV and wireless companies to those who served them at the bottom of the food chain like us, like accountants, getting to know everybody because we became part of a family of people who all worked together. I was at a closing. I was a young lawyer. I was about third man on the totem pole, as we say, and I was sitting in the conference room at a closing of the transaction, which was an acquisition of a new radio station here in Boston. My client had financed that station, and I was building my network. I sat there and I turned to the guy who owned the acquiring company. His name was Randy, and I said, Randy, are you going to reformat the station? Reformatting, to those who are not totally in the know, means taking an album-oriented rock station and making a country station, or something like that, which is what they were doing. And he said, yeah, and he talked about the switch to country for 30 minutes or something, because Randy loves to talk about himself. And I nodded appropriately and sagely at various places. And then I asked him one more thing. I said, well, what's your morning drive guy like? Have you got him tied down for good long contract, Randy? Now, neither of those questions required a deep understanding of this. Randy thought I was the smartest thing he'd ever seen and repeated to the banker, my client, well, she is really industry savvy. We love having you have lawyers like that. That's a good example of a very successful networking story coming off of the thing I keep driving home, which is knowledge and industry focus and being willing to ask people questions that are open-ended. The appearance that you give to somebody who you allow to speak of your smarts is as important as your actual smarts. I did understand that industry pretty well, but not the way Randy determined that I did. But I got an awful lot of good word of mouth for that. That's my favorite.
Well, and I'll add one too. I don't know if Betsy's expecting me to do this, but one of my favorite networking stories is when I was at Harvard Law School doing a career program several years ago. And after the program, there was a line of students that came up and followed up with questions. And then I looked up, and there was a person there who clearly was not a law student. And she introduced herself and started asking about my work, and it turned out to be Betsy. And we have become great friends and stayed in touch over all these years. And that obviously wouldn't have happened if Betsy hadn't taken the initiative to wait in line and come up afterwards. So
what Grover doesn't remember is that I actually peppered him with a couple of questions as well that I half answered in my self-absorbed question. But I loved what Grover had to say. Grover and I could have perceived ourselves as competitors because we were both coaching and advising similar constituency, but I saw Grover as just a really interesting, very skilled guy from whom I could learn a lot. And that's a vastly better relationship growing approach than a sort of siloed, everybody is my competitor kind of attitude, which some people have. And we have become great friends and we're collaborating, and I learn a lot from him all the time. So,
well, and likewise, yes.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left before we go to our takeaways, Grover. Did you have anything else you wanted to try to touch on?
There was a question that popped up that I was going to take, and I'll take a shot at it. It says, I am a non-traditional law student and was working full-time while going to law school, so I was not able to build a large network during law school. How do I get started? And without knowing a lot of the specifics, I would always suggest that you start with the career office. I do hear regularly from career offices that they don't feel like they see enough of students and alumni. And even if you don't live in the same city anymore, the school will be happy to see you. And that's why they exist, and they want you to get a job, and they want you to connect with alums. So I always recommend the low-hanging fruit, because in some ways alums sort of have to help you. I mean, some will be more helpful than others, but you have a built-in connection with alumni. And then if there are, minority bar associations, I would start there. And any other, kind of affinity groups where you can be a member and you have something in common with the other members. So those are my initial thoughts. Betsy, do you have anything to add on this?
Say, don't worry if you have no network from school. As I said, I failed to stay in touch with the Chief Justice, so my life could have been over there. But my network really did not include my classmates particularly, because I really wasn't attentive to this. You start where you are, start anywhere, go to the places where your network lives. And if that's your bar association, if that's a charitable organization, if that's a social club, start there and just get to know people. And gradually it comes, because if you put yourself out there professionally and you equip yourself to be useful to others, it does come. But there's also a host of articles on this where you can get some ideas, and I recommend Grover's attached materials particularly for that purpose. So I think this might be a good time for us to just take stock. We've got about 6 minutes left, or 8 minutes left, I guess, and recap what we've said. So you get the this is everything kind of sense from us, the things that really we think matter. And I'm just going to start with in fact, the most obvious, which is it is not about selling. Networking and relationship building and business development, there is just very little there that needs to be viewed as a selling approach. Selling is branding and marketing materials, and it's ads that your firm or other business may put into papers, but that shouldn't concern you. You're there to be yourself, to be authentic. You do not need an elevator speech, not in my view. You need to be able to say your name and what you do. You need to talk to people and listen. And the better you listen, active listening it's called in my business now. These are buzzwords I've picked up, but active listening means you're listening and you're asking questions. You're thinking. The most active listening is when you have done the research about the person you're speaking with, and you know how to guide the conversation into areas that are most important to that person, be they personal or professional. So that's the way you start. That's how you network. As you engage with people, as we've said before here during this hour, you want to find ways to help people. And I have a colleague that I met on Twitter when I first started this business of mine. I met a lot of people on Twitter. That's where people are at, looking for information in the news, getting smarter, and interacting with people. And every few months he calls me up and he says, Betsy, how are you doing? How's your practice going? Is there anything I can do to help? And I do the same thing with him. That's the way you build relationships in a social setting, at home, and among your friends, and that's the way you build professional relationships.
Well, and that's a great segue to getting in the habit of trying to provide value, and that's true with the projects that you work on in your firm or for your employer and for clients, and it takes some, as Betsy mentioned earlier, some understanding and some work to understand what the needs are, so you figure out how to solve them. We did talk about events. Again, I would set small, measurable goals. I will meet 5 people, do a little research so you have something to talk about if you can. A lot of conferences will publish the attendee list beforehand. And again, you can talk to the conference organizers, and they may introduce you to others. People want you to feel comfortable at these events, even though it may not seem like they are comfortable because you don't know other people. But again, if you can also approach someone else who doesn't know anybody, it'll make it much easier for both of you.
And remember, if you take people's cards, which is great, I don't think it's as critical to give out cards as to get cards if people are willing to give them to you, and then simply say to them, well, link in with you. That's fine. But if you take people's cards, write down on the back of the card everything they said to you that seems relevant, put it in to your address book under their name. And it may include that bar mitzvah date, or the person's favorite wine, or the fact that they are triathlon people, competitors, high competitors, or rock climbers. This is relevant to what comes up next on in your follow-up effort.
Right, that's a great point. And another way to help make sure that people remember you and to let them know that you actually listened to what they said is when you're closing out the conversation, mention something that you all talked about. It was great chatting with you. Good luck on, XYZ. And they'll think, oh, that person was really paying attention and listened. And you're likely, if you do that, you're likely to make more of an impression than other folks. Let's see, take initiative. That's, we talked a little about that. Thinking of yourself as being self-employed, thinking of yourself as being entrepreneurial. Again, not selling and schmoozing, but making connections, advancing your substantive skills, and being proactive about building the practice that works best for you, and building relationships internally and externally with people that can help you and that you can help. With anxiety for students, again, the best advice I have, just keep plugging away and try to turn your anxiety into enthusiasm. I really want this job. I'm excited. I mean, frankly, that's why you're anxious, because you're excited about the prospect of this position. So, you also need to remember that everyone has been in your situation and can empathize with you. And I hear all the time in interviews, people say, oh, that person was anxious. It's very common. And, unless you have a total meltdown, people just ignore it. People know that, that interviews are difficult. And with respect to, being persistent, that's a quality that lawyers value. So again, I wouldn't worry about being overly pushy. I think yourself, or whether you're being a pest. Probably once a day is much too much. Once every 2 weeks or month, if you have something new to say, I don't think that's problematic, because lawyers are supposed to be assertive, and by following up, that's one way you show people that you're actually interested in working with them. And if you can also demonstrate that you have navigated a difficult job search process, that's a way to show that you have perseverance. And lawyers and law firms right now are focusing a lot on what people are referring to as grit and resilience as two key factors that help determine new lawyer success. So you can use your job search in that way to your advantage.
So let's just, as we finish out, just the obvious is be strategic. If you're anxious, make a plan. If you're anxious, if you're feeling defeated, make a plan. Develop a plan, figure out who you want to get to know, reach out to them, research them, follow up, be consistent. And most importantly, this is everything, be patient. It will happen. If you build it, they will come, that kind of thing. Thank you for joining us today. Let us know if you have other questions. We'd be happy to respond later. And look at the materials that we're going to provide to you after the webinar. Come back again for the next one. Emily?
Yes. Oh, thanks very much. I just want to say thanks very much. No, it's fine. Thanks very much. And I just want to reiterate, you all are already on the right track just by participating in this webinar. So all the best. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Grover and Betsy, for sharing all these excellent networking tips for law students and young associates. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. Attendees, please be sure to check out our website at ambar.org/careers for upcoming free career-related articles and webinars. There are recordings on the website now. You can also search for jobs at americanbar.org/jobs. Please complete our short survey before you leave. Thanks again for attending, and have a great day.